this morning.
I'm so sorry about that.
I muted this early so that we didn't.
Ah, sorry about that. I didn't want to record over the
I
music
got the,
or
I got the I got the message
so sorry
which
about that.
said it's being recorded. How come the voice comes later?
I had paused it. I, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you,
Mhm.
from the perspective of what Zoom is doing, I disagree with it. I mean, by all means, put up a banner, but not audio.
Yeah, I think they're I was looking right now at the disclaimer that they have regarding that, and it's only enterprise, education, or business account with 100 plus licenses can actually turn it off. So I
So when
can't
you have
afford
a
100
hundred, when you have
licenses.
100 plus more people listening, and you don't have to tell them it's recorded, that makes a lot of sense. You know.
I'm sure it makes business sense.
Um, I tell you what, we will start off because it just so happened yesterday we were having a conversation on the program, and we came up. I think it was with Andreas, and the topic of routers came up, and old versus new. In actual fact, I was just looking around recently because they now got, was it number six
Yes.
that you can get. But the other thing which I didn't sort of realize or know about, and that is apparently routers throttling your speed, basically. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I didn't know anything about it. How do I know whether or not my router is throttling my speed? And if it is, what do I do about it?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic in the sense that we depend on our routers more and more every day. And unfortunately, a lot of people out there do not have their own routers. They just depend on whatever the internet provider has given them or is pretty much renting them when they could be just having one themselves. And though some advances have been made in the sense that you can, in some cases, depending on your provider, if you're renting a router from them, you can change some of the settings, such as the Wi-Fi
Mm.
password and so on. The control that you have is pretty limited, and I'm more of a believer in that you should have total control of your network because it is your network. And in that regard, I always tell people, even though your network provider, your internet provider might give you an option to turn on Wi-Fi at the modem part, doesn't
Mhm.
matter if it's DSL or cable or anything else, it's much better if you have your own router and then you do your own filtering,
Mhm.
throttling, or whatever it is you want to do. So, regarding throttling, throttling can happen in several places. Most of the time, throttling is going on at your provider. If your provider notices that your internet use is different than the norm, is more than the usual or whatever, they can sometimes throttle your internet connection in some ways so that it doesn't overwhelm the capacity of the system. And this is because, as with many other systems, they are systematically oversold. You, as a provider, buy a certain amount of bandwidth, which is akin to how fat a pipe is regarding moving water
Mhm.
from point A to point B. And I'm sure that if every single person in Panama opened the faucet, turned on the shower, and flushed the toilet at the same time, the pressure would drop dramatically because it's not built for everybody using everything at the same time. There's a certain kind of 80-20 rule where 20% of the people at one point are using the system. So you can sell more, or you can charge more, or you can do more with less resources because people aren't using them 24/7. When you're looking at a web page, most of the time you're just scrolling up and down. You're not downloading anything in the middle. But nowadays things are changing. We have things like Zoom, like the one we're using right now to talk, which is a pretty constant stream. So people are depending on a constant stream of data on their machine. So they are less tolerant of throttling. So, assuming for a second that we don't have any throttling at the provider because they're doing their job and they're doing their
Mhm.
job well, the next place where some throttling can occur is at your router itself. if some conditions are met. For example, I used to have this very reliable, and I think you had one of those too, WRT54G from
Hmm.
Linksys back
Yeah,
in the
that was a
day.
good, that was good.
That thing probably lasted me for like a decade before I
I've
had
still got
to,
mine.
yeah, and it still
I'm not
probably
using it,
works.
but I keep it there in case I need a spare.
Yeah, and it will work perfectly up to about, I think, 60 megabits per second tops, because that's where the processor in the router that just takes packets from your machine and sends them out to the internet and vice versa. It can handle up to about 60 megabits per second.
Hmm.
And I remember that my provider back then said, hey, we're going to up your connection to 100. And I never saw a difference or whatever. And then I noticed when I connected my computer directly to the internet connection, it did give me that speed. But
Hmm.
below that, but on the router, it didn't, because the router just couldn't keep up. So another place where throttling can happen involuntarily in this case is at the router if the router can't keep up with these new speeds. Of course, it will keep up perfectly with the speeds of some providers that only give you like 10 or 15 megabits per second upstream.
Hmm.
I mean, any 20-year-old equipment can keep up with that, but the downstream part is the one that can't keep up. So you need some newer routers that can handle these higher speeds and higher connections, and also a higher number of devices. One of the things about radio, and you know a lot about radio, is that you usually can only use one frequency, one
Hmm.
channel at a time for a conversation. And a lot of devices, like your computer, if you're connected using Zoom or something like that, are pretty much going to be hogging that channel for some time. And routers nowadays, especially Wi Fi 4, 5, and 6, the last three generations of Wi Fi, have the capability of using multiple antennas, multiple radios, multiple channels
Hmm.
in multiple frequencies to avoid these collisions between devices all talking at the same time. And that can happen because you can have your laptop on a Zoom call while your significant other is watching something on Netflix,
Hmm.
while your other family member is maybe streaming something on YouTube. So they need to coexist in this situation. And some routers don't have enough radios for everybody or don't have enough channel width for everyone. So they sometimes have to turn the speed down a little bit. Another thing that also influences this is if you have repeaters, classic repeaters,
Oh,
and I'm
mhm.
not talking mesh networks like
Oh,
today, which use multiple radios to avoid this issue. Repeaters back in the day, and some people still have them, will repeat every single packet that goes through the network, and that effectively cuts the speed in half. So whatever it is you have, it's going to be cut in half for each repeater that you put in. So there's all of that going on. So what can people do about this? One of the things that they can do is that they can get new routers that support either Wi-Fi 5 or 6. Even though 6 is a little bit more expensive, I usually tell people that if you get a Wi-Fi 6 router, at least you're buying something that you know will be current for the next 5 or 10 years, just like
mhm,
what the WRT54G that you still have lying around there did. So it's going to be future proof. The second thing about Wi-Fi 6 versus 5 is that there are more technology standards baked into Wi-Fi 6 that allow it to go through walls easier. It allows it to go around corners easier. It allows it to mesh with other routers. And this usually is with other routers of the same manufacturer, but it allows
mhm,
it to mesh so that if you have a spot in your home or in your office where the Wi-Fi doesn't get properly, you can use one of these mesh routers. And what they do is they take one of their channels and use it to communicate without interrupting anybody else with the other router and use that as another set of antennas and frequencies to talk to so
mhm.
that the speed doesn't go down. The latency is almost negligible, and you get a lot better coverage. That being said, I'm a fan of wiring when you can. If you can wire, then wire. It's more reliable. It's usually faster, and it's just plain better. In my home, for example, I kind of bit the bullet when I moved in, and I said, you know what, I'm going to take out all the cable TV wire and all the unnecessary phone wire and everything. And I'm just gonna wire everything with network cabling. And so
Hmm.
in my home, I don't use mesh networks. I just have a wire that goes to every bedroom, and then there's a Wi-Fi access point in every bedroom, because the walls here are thick and probably built out of the same thing they built, adamantium and vibranium or some other Marvel movie magic metal or something, because you used to walk from one room to the other and the connection would drop.
Hmm.
So since they all have the same password and the same networking information, it's like roaming. You just move from one room to the other, and it works out well. But not everybody can wire their homes, because they're not their homes, they're renting, or
Hmm.
it's just too difficult. So mesh networks solve that issue very well. I've used devices from Linksys, and these are the ones that have best served me so far. There are really good devices as well from Asus and TP-Link and D-Link
Hmm.
and a couple of other really good manufacturers. And I think that's one of the best investments that people can make right now, especially because they're working from home, or they're working a lot more at home, or they're streaming a lot more stuff. And they can always keep their old router for an emergency. Or, for example, instead of burdening your existing router with, a guest network that would share your bandwidth or whatever, you can always set up that older router as a secondary. Most providers will allow you to have a second device plugged
Okay.
into their network and use that for the guest network. It'll be
That's about it.
completely
Hmm.
separate.
Hmm.
It won't have the same speed as your network, but then it means it can't hog your network. And you can always also hook up all your Internet of Things devices, your light switches, your Amazon devices, your Series, your home pods, anything that has to do with Internet of Things, so that if they get broken into, at least it's not your main network where all your files are and your computers are and your important devices are.
Mm.
And if you don't have a second router, then it's not a bad idea also to put your Internet of Things devices on the guest network, so that, in case of any security breaches or whatever, then they won't be as easily accessible, or they can't be used to jump onto your actual systems.
All right, here's a question for you, because my cable and wireless modem is also, I guess, a router.
Yeah.
So I could use that for the guest network and use my ASUS for the rest. Yes or no?
Yes, you can. And one of the great things about that is that it would be separated even further upstream from your network.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it would be next to impossible for anybody who wanted to jump from that network onto your main network to actually use it. So, yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
One thing to keep in mind is a lot of the devices from the network providers are configured using password encryption called WEP, or
Hmm.
wireless equivalency protocol, or something like that. And that's insecure. It can be cracked in like 14 seconds nowadays.
That's okay. They
So
can just get access to the guests. I don't really care anyway.
exactly. That was just my point. If your guests don't mind, they can use that network, but they always should use some sort of a VPN.
Hmm. Okay. Now, the other thing is, just while we were talking, I thought, oh, let me do a little test here in the studio, because I've got all my computers, including the laptops in the studio, hardwired into the modem. So they're basically not using the Wi-Fi. They're sort of connecting directly to the connections at the back. So what I did was, in actual fact, disconnected my laptop from that, so it's running on the actual sort of Wi-Fi, and I did a little speed test. And the direct connection to this computer got a download speed of 542.5 megabytes because I have a 600 megabyte thing, which is reasonable, and
Mhm.
an upload of 15.5. Well, I normally have 20, so that's on the one which is wired in to the router.
Mhm.
Now, the laptop, I disconnected it from directly from the router, so it's actually using the Wi-Fi, and I got 547.64 with the router that's download, and I got 15.54 with the upload. So I got better results using the Wi-Fi than I did using the Ethernet cable. Why?
You live pretty close to the ocean, and that usually can wreak havoc on copper connections by oxidizing the surface and making it so that it's not as good a connection as it should be. That's the first thing that I would probably look
Mm,
for: better cables and connectors. Just like you probably have to do with the speaker wire in your home, every couple of years, cut the end off, put it
mhm,
in a new connector, and then put it back in. You may have to do the same thing with your network connections at home. You may have to change the network cables. That's the first thing. The second thing is you may have them connected to a switch that can handle that much speed, but maybe increase the latency a little bit so that it doesn't work as fast as it should.
mhm. I mean, I'm not complaining. There's only, gosh, half of whatever it is
It's
different.
a
So
it's a percentage point at best.
it's negligible, but
Totally.
it was just an interesting little test.
Yeah.
Now the other thing that you wanted to talk about today was you mentioned Apple. What are they?
Yeah.
Is this because they just had a developers?
They
Uh,
did. WWDC, they have their annual developer conference where they talk about all the stuff that they're going to do software wise. And just like in September, they usually talk about all the stuff they're going to do hardware wise. This is more focused on development and software development and what
mhm,
they're going to take their software towards over the next couple of months and years. And there was a lot of improvements to a lot of the software that people take for granted in the Apple devices. For example, regarding spatial audio, you've probably heard of surround sound and so
mhm,
on. And
mhm,
there are software tools that you can use on the computer and in some devices so that it can tell if you're facing towards the computer that's making the sound. And if you tilt your head to the side, it can actually make the sound like it's in front of you and
mhm,
just rotate the sound virtually around you so that you feel that you're actually in front of, I don't know, a movie theater or a concert or the action in a movie and so on. Well, they're going to do the same thing to the Apple devices with their AirPods and all the different models of AirPods, not only for media that you can watch movies on their Apple
mhm.
devices and whatever, but also for FaceTime. If you turn your head or whatever, it's going to sound like people are, in front of you on the phone in some way. They also improved FaceTime with something called SharePlay, where in supported applications like Spotify or Netflix, you're going to be able to play a music and then have it shared with the other person on the other side of the FaceTime call
Okay.
so you can hear it at the same time and enjoy it and comment on it like you were talking to a friend watching a movie.
Mhm,
You can do the same thing with other applications, and this is something that's going to surprise some people, with Android devices and Windows computers. You won't be able to start a FaceTime call
mhm.
with a Windows or an Android machine, but you will be able to participate. Kind of what happens with Skype. If you don't have Skype, people can send you a Skype link, and you
Right.
click on it, and you get a web browser.
Mhm.
Kind of the same thing, but with Android and Windows. It's
That's
also
good.
yeah, it's really interesting. It's going to have voice isolation, so if you're in a crowded coffee shop or something like that, it's going to focus on your voice as well. So that's going to be
Mhm.
interesting. It's going to have background blur for FaceTime, which pretty much every other application now has. Well, FaceTime is going to have that too. One other thing that comes to iOS is going to be focus modes. They call this focus modes. It's basically you choose different categories for your notifications. Just like in Android, you can say, well, I want this or that or whatever level of notifications. Well, Apple's going to go one step further and say, okay, let's say I set one called work and one called vacation mode. And vacation mode only gets notifications from my closest family members. Work mode only gets notifications from my work. You can have different sets of focus modes in that way. And you can also batch your notifications. For example, right now I'm awake, but I'm not too awake. So maybe I'll set up my work notifications to start at 9 a.m. after I've had my second cup of coffee, just, to give you an example. You can batch them so that they don't come in exactly when they came in, but at certain points of time in the day, so that you can also focus on what you're doing and not interrupt yourself by just looking at your phone every time it dings. They're going to have live text and photos. This means that you can take a picture and then just copy and paste any text that's on the picture. Let's say you send a picture of a receipt. You can just select with your finger and copy the text in the receipt or a street sign or anything like that. They're going to have a lot of stuff like on Android, for example, widgets on the home screen, which is something that Apple users have been asking for like a decade. In privacy, they're going to have Siri use the onboard AI instead of sending your text to the Apple Cloud, which is good for privacy advocates everywhere. You're going to be able to share your health data with family members and providers and do interesting things like your phone can calculate your gait and how you walk and be able to tell if you're going to fall or develop some sort of a tendency to fall and alert you or your family members, hey, be careful, you're walking funny.
Yeah,
So
that would be going off all the time if I had one of those.
exactly. So there's that. The Apple Watch is going to be able to tell if you're breathing properly and let you know as well. Tell you if you're breathing too shallow or your respiratory rate is out of whack or whatever. And it's going to have things like trends where you can have the phone tell you if your heart rate is trending up or down, if your any of your health parameters are trending in a way that is good or bad for you. It's going to be able to tell that. Even step counts.
Just quickly, I saw this morning. It says here, Facebook's first ever smartwatch is slated to roll out next summer. You know what? I can't think of anything more annoying than a Facebook watch. It's Facebook on its own drives me nuts. Let alone having a watch that's going to help.
Well, their Facebook phone never took off, so I don't think their watch is ever going to take off anyway.
Well, then neither did their currency, remember they?
Yeah, the Libra thing. Yeah.
Yeah, nice name.
Yeah, you would expect that from a Libra.
So listen, one thing, because, when I heard about the developers conference that Apple were going to have, and of course, have they said anything? Because they were getting a lot of flack from developers about the App Store. Is that going to be addressed?
I don't think it is. It's going to be that elephant in the room that nobody talks about. And I don't see it mentioned anywhere. They did make some changes earlier in the sense that if your app makes less than 1 million, they're only going to charge you 15% or something like that. But if your app starts making more than that, then they're going to charge you 30% of that, which again, it's their prerogative to do, but it may be a little bit more than, some developers might be able to get, especially because Apple is charging not only, I understand that they're charging for creating the marketplace and everything else and so on, but if people can use other means of payment to pay for this, then why should they still charge 30%? It would be a lot easier for them to say, okay, so how much does, say, PayPal or any other processor charge you for the transaction? They probably charge around 3%. Apple could get away with charging 2.5 and still make a boatload of money.
Mm, mm, mm.
So I think it's more a matter of, I don't know if it's pride or what, because they're sitting on this enormous pile of cash right now. It's not like they need the money.
No, no. And what is
So
more, because it's been in the news, these great people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they're not paying tax.
yeah,
They want everybody else to pay them. So like, well, in this case, with Apple, I mean, I'm not sure how much Tom what's it pay Tim Cook pays in his tape. But the
mhm,
thing is, they want people to give them 30%, yet they're not prepared to pay 30% tax.
exactly,
You know,
exactly. Just like you and I pay close to 30%,
yeah,
sometimes even more.
yeah.
So yeah,
But
I think they
you've
should
got
work on
money.
that. Hmm?
That's nice. You've got money. That's nice.
Yeah,
But
I mean, there's efforts right now being done. I think Warren Buffett is one of them, one of the people behind it, to legislate in some way so that no matter how much money you make, you pay around the same thing as a middle class person would pay, which is between 25 and 30%.
mm.
And it's not happening yet.
And just quickly, any sort of thoughts now? I mean, I noticed Joe Biden has dropped the ban on TikTok and on WeChat, which is one thing, but nothing about releasing Huawei from the use of the likes of Android. What chance have they got with me? I know we touched on this again last week as well, but with this coming up, what chance have they got with Harmony? I mean, I wouldn't, if, as we mentioned, Microsoft couldn't make it work. Can Huawei?
I think they can, especially in, I would say, alternate devices like IoT devices, things like cars, refrigerators, things like that. I think it's going to be a very interesting alternative, just like Tizen, for example, was for Samsung
Mm,
for some of its IoT. That being said, it's interesting, and we got this from the last Google conference. Tizen is going to be uh, acquired or wrapped into Wear OS by Google so that it integrates even better with Android. So the way I see it, Harmony OS is going to be an interesting offshoot for some time, and maybe history will repeat itself, and it will be folded back into Android once things, get better between the US and Huawei.
okay, and I tell you what, just to bring us to a conclusion for today, someone just bought a $22.5 million penthouse entirely with Bitcoin. 22.5. So, well, that's probably what, 3 Bitcoins these days.
Something like that. Something
But
like that.
yeah, says apparently the deal is considered to be the largest known cryptocurrency real estate purchase to date.
Known.
Known.
Let's focus on known.
Yes.
I'm sure somebody's already bought an island and is making some sort of underground volcanic lair.
Yes, or a submarine for moving around his illicit goods or whatever. So yeah, no, Bitcoin. I don't know. Have you delved into Bitcoin yourself?
I have a wallet and it's got about $40 in it, and I use it to pay for things like website hosting or stuff that I buy secondhand, things like that. It's just like money in a PayPal account. It just is a little bit more volatile. That's it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I think it was like $10 or $15 last year, and now it's 40, but it might be $10 or $15 tomorrow.
Cool.
Right now, it's not an investment for me. It's just a means of payment. It's like I have a jar in my bedroom with Mexican pesos and euros and stuff that you forget in your pockets when you come back from traveling. It's kind of like that. It's just a wallet with some money from somewhere else in it.
Well, one of these big investors said the other day, he said, to be quite honest, if you're going to invest in the cryptocurrency, don't invest more than you're prepared to lose.
Exactly. With like everything else. If
Hmm.
you're going to be investing in something that isn't, a business that you work at and, have some control over, then definitely don't invest more than you can actually lose.
Yeah. Oh well, that's I'm out of it. I mean, I just don't. It just sort of goes over my head, I'm afraid. So, mind you, most things do really. Well, what else have you got planned? Well, you were talking about CES and anything that's for next year, isn't it?
Yeah, that's in January 5 to 8, I think. And the previous 2 days, that's for media. It's going to be held in Las Vegas as usual, and it's going to be in person as well. I'm keeping my fingers crossed and I'm saving every penny to see if I can make it there, or if any of the brands are listening. Hey, I'm your guy here. So hopefully I'll be invited and be able to make it, because it's been a while and I really miss that. Just getting to see all the technology, getting to talk to all the people who are making
Mhm.
and breaking the tech news. I think that's a wonderful opportunity that we should all look for. And if you can't make it physically, this year has proven that you can do a lot virtually, and you will be able to attend a lot of it on the virtual scene. So it's going to be really interesting to share all the information that comes uh, from CES next year. So hopefully we'll be there.
Good. And then we can Zoom you while you're walking around and be nosy.
Exactly.
There we go. That's it. Dr. Computer, Alex Newman, as always, thank you so much for spending time with us here on this morning's breakfast show. And all being well, we'll be back with you next week.
See you next week.
There we go. Dr. Computer.